Great. Here we have some more people joining, but we'll begin our special lunch with the Friends program. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon on the first day of September here. I'm Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. And we have a great panel today to talk about our special update on fires in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and throughout the Superior National Forest. We have Connie Cummins, the Forest Supervisor for the Superior National Forest. We have Ann Schwaller, the Program Manager for the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. We have Clare Shirley, the owner and operator of Sawbill Canoe Outfitters. And we have Clark McCreedy, the Public Information Officer for the Eastern Area Incident Management Team for the Type 2 incidents, and he'll talk a little bit more about what a Type 2 incident is. And I also want to thank Joanna Gilkerson from the Superior National Forest, the Public Affairs Specialist for the work that she's doing, and my colleague Maya Swope, who's helping out with this program as well. And I also want to again thank our team here at Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. We're working very hard these last few weeks. We're at the state fair working, reaching the public that way. We're working on policy programs to protect the wilderness and education programs to connect young people of all backgrounds to the wilderness. So very grateful for all the work that my colleagues are doing here. And I most of all want to thank all of you that are participating today and watching this program, that we do our work to support your love of the Boundary Waters. For over 45 years, Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness has protected, preserved, and restored the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and the wilderness areas throughout the Superior National Forest and Quetico Superior ecosystem. Our work today focuses on three areas: wilderness, people, and community. For the wilderness, we work on policies to protect the land and water of the wilderness. For people, our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters program connects young people of all backgrounds to the wilderness through online programs, classroom presentations, and scholarships for wilderness canoe trips. And then finally, for community, we recognize that the communities that are gateways to the Boundary Waters must thrive in order for the wilderness to be truly protected. So we support policies to bring broadband internet service throughout rural Minnesota. We support policies that help small businesses thrive in Ely, Grand Marais, and throughout the North Shore here. And again, you are the key to the success here. A couple housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A tab. You can put questions in there, and in the chat button, you can provide comments there. And that way we can communicate throughout this program that'll last about 40-45 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A a session that'll last about another 10 minutes or so, and we'll conclude at 1 o'clock. Again, thank you for being here, and I am so very excited to be able to bring, I start off with Connie Cummins, the Forest Supervisor, who will provide an overview of where things are at right now. So thank you so much, Connie, and everyone for being here.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for inviting me, and to everybody who's out there. I know you all have a keen interest in the Boundary Waters. I guess I would just start out with just a general overview. It's been a very long season for us on the Superior in terms of fire. Typically, our fire season starts in the spring after the snow melts, and then it usually pretty much ends around when the green up occurs. And then summer is usually pretty quiet, and fall again we'll start picking up fires as vegetation starts to cure out. This year we started fighting fires in March, and we're still at it. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. I'll get it to stop. Can you stop? Yeah, thanks. So just a quick overview, just to give you some perspective, about the extreme drought that we've been in. Some of our, in spring, we did what I call a lot of initial attack whack-a-mole. Basically, lots of fire initial starts. Our resources were on it. We had lots of, we had adequate aviation, and we were able to pretty much contain all of our initial starts early on, although there's still some out there that we have in a condition where they'll stay in their footprint, but we will not call them out until probably the snow flies. We picked up the Delta fire late spring, early summer, very small fire under 70 acres, yet it took weeks to get that to a place where we felt we could put it into a control status. And that's because the fires are burning so deep right now into the duff that we literally put thousands and thousands of gallons of water on that fire and really had a hard time controlling that small fire. As we moved through the season, obviously more initial starts, a lot of them in the wilderness, having to make some really tough choices about, putting people in to remote areas. Did they have good ingress, egress? And so many different tactics of fighting fire. I will say, just to add into that, we have been in full suppression mode since spring. We are not managing any fires for resource value. The conditions are just not right to do that. And nationally, we've have a directive where we won't do that, just based on the fires across the country and the need for those resources in other places. So we are in full suppression mode in the wilderness. That doesn't mean that we go what's called direct. We can back off to some lakes and do, take some actions where it's safer and more higher probability of success. And we've done a lot of that. As we move into just the past few weeks, we picked up the Greenwood fire that was outside the wilderness, but it showed extreme conditions, basically doubling in size on 2 different days. And really brought in this type 2 incident management team to help us with that fire. And when we saw the conditions, with the conditions we had, that fire moved fast. We also have the John Eck fire and the Whelp fire, which are up in the wilderness. The Whelp fire right now, we've made a decision that is pretty much staying generally within the area of its footprint. And so we're not staffing it right now. It's just a very difficult fire to get at, but we are monitoring it closely. The John Eck fire, we're backing off and we're looking at potential strategies to look at where we can connect portages and lakes and an area where we know we can protect it and keep it within that footprint. We're very concerned about that fire. It only got a ½ inch of rain on it, while say the Greenwood fire got 2 inches of rain, and so we're always concerned about the potential of it moving up onto the Gunflint Trail. And so we've got the team is also has that fire under their command, and we're again putting a lot of thought and strategy into how we're going to keep that in its footprint. The Canadian fires, for a long time, those were a high concern. They're still up there. They are still of concern. However, they got a lot of rain and really knocked back some of the activity on those. So we will continue to monitor those very closely. We've had some that have burned down right to the border, but fortunately, we haven't gotten high winds from that come from the north and push south. All of our winds have been primarily south going north. And so the fires were all through the season backing down towards the boundary waters, but making large runs north. And so they really had their hands full, but we do work very closely with our Canadian partners in watching those fires. So that is pretty much an overview of where we are today. And then an update on closures. So yeah, the $1 million question, right? I think it's been a long time since we put a closure on the entire boundary waters. We have seen extreme drought conditions that we have not seen before. And what we were finding is when we got fires, even with all kinds of aviation resources on them, we could not get them out. And we knew the potential for them to run was high. The conditions weren't lessening. It takes 2 to 3 days sometimes to go in with our public safety crew and get visitors out. And so we made the decision for our firefighter and our public safety that we needed to close the wilderness until conditions abated. Unfortunately, all summer they didn't abate, and so the wilderness remained closed. We look at it daily, I can promise you. I know the impact to both our businesses and of course to all of our visitors of having that wilderness closed. It's a high concern of mine. And so every day we're just kind of weighing factors of safety versus, letting people back in. So the one thing I guess I would really want to say is, first of all, we remain in extreme drought. I know we got some rain, but we are in extreme drought across the forest. And so depending on where you're standing on the forest, it can be anywhere from 8 to 16 inches less than we would normally have this time of year. So that is a large margin of drought. And it's going to take several weeks of 1 to 2 inches a week before we even consider getting back up to conditions of what we would consider normal. And I think probably the snow is going to fly before that happens, but we'll see. And then I think the second important thing that everybody has to realize, that as we look at decisions on these closures and can we partially start to lift them, is that, we cannot eliminate risk. Risk is on a spectrum, as you probably know, and of course risk is part of the wilderness experience. But we can't, on the extreme, there's absolutely no risk, which means we don't allow visitors in, although there's always still a risk to our firefighters. And on the other extreme of the spectrum is that we just open the entire thing up and go with that. And so we know neither one of those, because they both have consequences. And so we look at that spectrum and we try to move the dial in an area where we feel like we're not eliminating all risk, but the risk is acceptable. But again, I go back to, as if you go into the wilderness sometime here in the future, to recognize there is risk, and I can't guarantee the outcome of that. So how do we look at that spectrum that I just talked about? So first of all, we engage our fire experts, and they look at several things. They look at the drought conditions that we've had. They have all kinds of analysis they can do on drought conditions, the conditions of the fuels, how dry they are, depending on how much rain they got. So we have what are called heavy fuels and light fuels. And the light fuels, obviously, they get wet quicker and they dry out sooner. They look at predicted long-term weather. So they're looking out over the next month and trying to see what kind of weather we can predict to come in. They look at the time of year, and they look at the availability of firefighting resources. So those are the things we take into consideration when we make decisions on either putting a closure in place or lifting a closure. Now, as most of you know, we have gotten some rain last week. We certainly have gotten more rain on the west side of the forest versus the east side of the forest. So again, as I was saying, Greenwood and west of there, a lot of them got 2 inches of rain. The John Eck fire got a ½ inch of rain. So that's a very big discrepancy in amount of rain, and something that we have to take into account. And that is actually pretty common fall conditions for us, where you get to the very tip of that northeast Arrowhead region where you'll find that case. And so the next couple of weeks are predicted to be warm and dry. And again, there's a definite difference between the two sides. Now, the good news is that, we're moving into fall and the days are shorter, the days are cooler. And what that creates is a situation where the time available during the day where a fire can really heat up, which typically is mid to late afternoon, and get rolling and start a head of steam. That number of hours decreases as we move into fall. In fact, it decreases almost an hour a week from here on out. So that really lessens the probability of, even if we got a fire start, of it picking up and moving. I would say, in addition to that, fall does bring the situation where fuels do start to they hit frost, or the leaves are drying and falling off. That creates additional fuels on the forest floor. And then we also know it's not unusual in the fall to have a few days where the conditions align, where you might have some warmer temperatures, lower relative humidities, and higher winds. And if they're in the right fuel condition, a fire can get up and move. I think our biggest concern, though, in that areas would be in areas where we receive less rain on the east side, and also where we have current fires. So the John Eck, the Whelp, Greenwood, areas where there's already fire in place versus a new lightning strike popping up. So those areas are of higher concern for us. And so those are all of the things that we're taking into consideration, and we're evaluating, could we do some partial lifting of some of the closure area? We're talking right now with our fire experts and looking at some maps and having conversations and weighing risk. And so I would say stay tuned. We'll be making decisions on where we'll go next here shortly.
Great, thanks so much, Connie, for that overview of where things are at and the different factors that go into your decision making there. And Clare Shirley, from your perch there as the owner and operator of an outfitter, what are you hearing from right now from the public? So.
Yeah, so I'm at Sawbill Canoe Outfitters. We're 24 miles up at the end of the Sawbill Trail that starts in Tofty. So we're just a couple 4 miles away from the Whelp fire, kind of nestled up here in the woods. So our phone is like ringing off the hook all day, every day. People want to know if I have some sort of special knowledge or what my guess might be for closures and updates and things like that. So I totally get that. We're very much in the same sort of like wait and see game as everybody else. So our particular challenge as a business right now is to continue, operating at some capacity, trying to be at the ready. We're trying to maintain enough staff and enough operations here so that when and if the Boundary Waters reopens, we're ready to start renting canoes again. But it's tough, the longer it goes on, the tougher it is for outfitters like us to keep having operating expenses and issuing refunds all day, every day, hoping that we'll reopen again. So we are as hopeful as everybody else. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that weigh into this. The economic impact to outfitters like mine is one factor, but it's a small one. It's hard to argue your case when there's, public safety and things like that come into play as well. So we're in the wait and see. And, certainly as soon as we get official information, Sawbill will post on our newsletter at sawbill.com. We post updates there, especially things that have to do real specifically with like the Sawbill area of the Boundary Waters. We never post anything on social media. And I think this is true for a lot of the outfitters. We try not to post anything until we have like something official and signed. So we're not like spreading gossip around, because that doesn't help anybody plan their trips. You shouldn't plan on hearsay. Wait for an official order.
Great, thank you, Claire. And from your perspective, the ranger stations are also getting a lot of calls as well, the district ranger stations, right?
Yeah, all 5 of our offices are getting a lot of calls, and Cushway in particular has a lot of folks in the lobbies waiting to see, they've traveled, and it's difficult. There's always going to be people that we miss in transit with these things, either closing or opening something. It's difficult. We try to email, we try to text, we try to call as best we can, but there's always going to be those folks. And I also in the chat just put our main website link, and where we have all of our closures on. So hopefully people can look at that and check. There was a question in there, I think, somewhere about where to find that info. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And for that, now Clark, we have up on the screen here the map of the Greenwood fire, and there's been significant development since we spoke at our last lunch with the Friends program on Friday, and maybe you can walk us through the current status of things for the Greenwood fire.
Sure. So probably the best way to start this discussion is just to let people know that we have a transition going on today. So the Eastern Area Incident Management Team actually timed out yesterday. Typically our assignments are 14 days. I think we are on day 15. So we have a new team coming in, the Northern Rockies Type 2 team. They came in yesterday. And what I want folks to know in terms of this transition, it's never an abrupt one. So the Type 2 team from the Northern Rockies started coming in Tuesday. they overlap with us all day today. We call this the transition day. And so they are shadowing us. They're getting on the ground experience from the folks that have been here with the Eastern area team. And the idea there is to have to ensure continuity of operations so that we have a seamless transition as the Eastern area team transitions out and the Northern Rockies team transitions in. So you mentioned, Chris, earlier, the type 2 team. Type 2 teams come in at the request of an agency when they feel like the fire has exhausted their capacity or their resources. And one of the things, a couple of the things that type 2 teams bring to an incident is, number one, the ability to acquire resources nationally. And number two, it allows the forest, in this case, to return their resources to the business of what Connie described as the whack-a-mole process, looking for new fire starts, being able to respond to do what we call initial attack on new fire starts. So it returns the capacity to the forest, and the type 2 team takes on the management responsibility. And not too long ago, we took on the John Eck and Whelp as well. So the Greenwood fire, you're absolutely right. We have some black on the map. Some things have changed. So if you look at that Highway 2 corridor that goes north and west on the west side, we have painted the perimeter black. And then coming over the top on the Petcha Lake Road, the northwest, we have containment there, extending down Highway 1 to a point there almost to the northeast corner. So when we paint the perimeter black, the operations staff has determined that they have good hard containment line that should hold, under normal circumstances, any sort of fire that wants to creep out of the interior. And so it starts with a primary containment line, in this case roads. We improve that using heavy equipment. So we've had a substantial logging operation, particularly along Highway 1, to widen that containment line. And then, as most folks know, we did a tactical firing operation to burn additional fuels away from that containment line. Now, that doesn't mean operations have stopped. And so, in fact, today we still have crews marching those containment lines, hunting for hot spots. And Corey Henry, our operations section chief, this morning termed that a seek and destroy mission. So we actually looked at the IR maps, the infrared maps overnight. There's still some hot spots. They use that intelligence to go out there, hunt down those hot spots, and improve those lines. So even though we're saying good hard containment and have painted the perimeter black, so now we consider the fire 37% contained, they are still in there working those areas to ensure that they find and detect areas of heat along the perimeter. The other thing I'd like to let folks know, looking at that infrared map, which you guys have access to. So if you go to INCIWeb and look at Greenwood, there should be a link there that is in Terra, or you can consult the Google for infrared data. And actually the public has access to nationwide infrared data on any of the fires in the United States. So it's a wonderful resource in terms of looking at the heat on the landscape. One of the take-home messages here is that there is very little heat in the interior of the Greenwood fire. So operationally, our objectives for this next couple of days, next 2, 3, 4 days, as the team transition, and even today, we're looking at this northeast corner. So as Highway 1 goes east, Highway 1 turns south, it intersects the Stony River grade, and that Stony River grade, you can see on this map, goes to the south-southeast. Our operational folks are hoping that this northeast block that is defined by Highway 1 and the Stony River grade, and then there's a Stony Lookout Road that goes to the northwest. It defines a nice block of ground. Yeah, thank you for running that cursor over the map. They are looking to have another tactical firing operation. They tried it yesterday, still too much moisture from that 2-inch rain event. They're going to look at that today. And so that's one of their priorities, is putting some black on the ground. We've got primary containment lines. We have improved lines using heavy equipment to add to those primary containment lines. And now they're about the business of adding some black to the landscape, removing fuels using a tactical firing operation. So that's the hope, that they will get that done today. And if they do so, that will provide a substantial barrier to any movement of fire to the east. And then you can see those structures there in the community of Isabella farther to the east. So that's one of their primary objectives in improving that Stony River grade and trying to put some black on the map in terms of that northeast area. Now, last night we had another community meeting at Wolf Ridge. And for you folks, there's a recording of that on the Forest Facebook page. And going through that meeting, our IAC, Brian Pisarek, gave folks a similar update to what I'm giving you. And he was fairly open about the fact that he feels, and the operational staff feels, like we are in a fairly good place. So once we continue to bring out that black line on Highway 1, that will precipitate that discussion, that next discussion of when are we going to open these corridors. So that's very much on the mind of the Lake County Sheriff's Department, the operational staff of the incoming incident management team. And I think as we move that containment line to the east, intersect that Stony River grade, get that work done, then we can probably look to have an earnest discussion about what the next step is in terms of road closures. So something that's on everybody's mind here as well. But some genuinely significant progress over the last couple of days. And as Connie noted, we've got more moderate temperatures, moderate weather, and that means moderate fire behavior. So we look to see some progress here in the near term. And so John Eck, and I don't think I could do a better job than Connie in terms of giving you guys a briefing on the John Eck. So about 1,350 acres, no significant fire growth there. The business on the John Eck is figuring out access, getting people in, identifying portage areas, identifying areas where we might establish fire breaks. They're identifying areas for hose lays. There's no shortage of water, obviously. And so that's all about identifying what's the best access at the moment. So the John Eck Fire is staffed. We are also flying our light air attack reconnaissance aircraft over the John Eck, so single engine aircraft, and his job is to, provide intelligence from the air. So that's pretty much where the John Eck is. That is staffed, and they're in the business of looking at access and then looking at future fire lines. Same with the Whelp. That fire is unstaffed, no significant growth, but we are not neglecting it. We're using that light reconnaissance aircraft to monitor that fire, report back on intelligence every day. So monitor status, unstaffed on the Whelp. The John Eck, we have people on the ground, and we're still using our air resources to monitor those two fires.
And Clark, how many people are on the ground right now?
Here on the Greenwood, approximately 500, and I'm not certain about what we've got on the John Eck. I think they were talking about tens, approximately 20 people on the ground for the John Eck. I know they flew 4 people in yesterday to add to those folks there.
Okay, thank you. And Clark, there had been a question here about how the fires spread. You mentioned something interesting last Friday. The Greenwood fire, one of the fingers of that, I think it was in the southeast, actually extended underground, right? And maybe you just want to reiterate what you said on Friday about how that spread.
Well, Connie made a great point about how this landscape holds heat. So we thought we had a good, strong containment line when we started working across the south flank nearly 2 weeks ago. And what actually happened in that case, and you see that finger that extends to the southeast, and that was a product of a northwest wind that pushed that finger. Well, we had containment line across the southern flank of the fire, and it actually burned down into the duff and then crept underground. And then when the right conditions presented themselves, popped up on the surface. We got a good wind, we had high temperatures, we had low humidity, and it found the opportunity to grow. And so Connie's absolutely right. We know that these fires can skunk around, they can hide in the peat or in large pockets of deadened down timber. And so the solution to that is good, strong containment lines, planning ahead. And that's why we've got this Stony River grade out here way to the east, and actually that extends well to the south. And so we're going to continue to work our way south on that Stony River grade to serve as a primary containment line. And so we're continuing to bring that heavy equipment. We call that, marching, the heavy equipment guys continuing their march to the south along the Stony River grade. And so that gives us the opportunity to build a really substantial containment line while we, working off that Stony River grade.
And Clark, we've had a question here on the map. We see Division A, Division B, Division C, Division Z here. Maybe you want to explain what that means.
That's an excellent question. And you're going to see those large brackets on the map, like between Division A and Division B. And there's other brackets on the map. Those are our artificial division breaks. And so we assign our resources by division. And so those brackets on the map just define what those division boundaries are. Now think about this in terms of safety of firefighters. When we've got 500 people on the ground, they've all got individual names. How does a operations chief reach someone on the ground in the event that there's an issue related to safety? And think back to that event that pushed this fire to the west. So in Division C, there's but one and only one supervisor. And so if you're faced with communicating with someone under a difficult situation, what we do radio wise is we refer to their position rather than refer to their name. And so if I were to reach the Division C supervisor, it would be Division C supervisor information. And there's but one person that's going to respond to that radio request. And so by dividing up our resources by division, by referring to those folks by their position as opposed to their name, we can very carefully track and monitor those folks on the landscape. So divisions, we just break up responsibilities by divisions. We can track people by divisions. We track them by their position. So I hope, Chris, that helps explain a bit of that.
Great. Thanks so much, Clark. And there was another question that I just thought we'd address now as well. So you mentioned how the fire goes in the duff and can spread. How far down does it go? Actually in the ground, are we talking 6 inches? Are we talking 12 inches? What are we talking here?
Well, in this sort of a landscape, we can talk about that in terms of feet. And so you think about a typical spruce bog, we might have a peat layer as much as 10 feet thick. And I had an interesting video that was dropped on our desk the other day from the Georgia Interagency State Crew, and they were down working in that southern flank. And one of the crew members had a GoPro on his video or on his helmet. So he's videoing the walk in, and they're going through a typical spruce bog. And Connie had a wonderful backdrop behind her that should have given you sort of the typical picture of a spruce bog in terms of greenery and lush vegetation. and the Georgia interagency state crew was walking through the same landscape, but in this case, it was nothing but brown. And so when Connie spoke to the condition on the landscape in terms of prolonged drought, you could dramatically see it in a lot of different places here on the forest, where typically a spruce bog would be nice and green, vegetation would still be green, but in this what the lack of moisture has done to the landscape. And so, and somebody else at the public meeting the other day talked about digging down through an area in his yard, and it was like 18 inches of duff without any moisture. So a lot of places where the drought has really made a difference in terms of the condition of the fuels on the landscape. And that just preps an area like this, makes it prone to fire. All it needs is an ignition source to begin. And in this case, it was a lightning strike on the Greenwood. So it's sort of a word to the wise, a cautionary note that in spite of the fact that we've got containment, in spite of the fact that we've got moderate fire weather, people ought not to become complacent. So resist the temptation, maintain your vigilance, particularly in terms of how you use fire, stoves, equipment, etc. It's still a good time to be cautious.
Great. Thank you, Clark. We had talked about the Canadian fires earlier in this presentation here, and perhaps we could discuss this in a little more detail here. This map provides an overview of the Canadian fires right now, and perhaps Anne or Connie, if you want to talk about the fires in Canada here.
Sure. I'm not sure I can say a whole lot more than what I have said. I do know it's been a really tough season for our Canadian partners. They have had mega fires up there. They don't have the resources, the firefighting resources that we have down in the States. And their primary focus for most of the summer was protection of the villages to the north. And so, you know, they did help where they could with some of those southern fires, or the fires that were down along the border, but really they had to focus their efforts north of there. We flew it daily, we monitored it, we communicated daily with them. And we were ready if we were to get a strong push, north wind pushing to the south, to be prepared to sort of, as I would say, receive that fire if it came over the border, or actually even be prepared to take some actions along the border in help and suppression of those fires. So what I understand, and I can't speak specifically about how much moisture they got, but they did get quite a bit, which did sort of put a damper on them for a while. And they are not by any means out. They are still considered a threat. But certainly for the same reasons I talked about, you know, as we move into fall conditions, you know, they will become less of a threat as we move into October and November. But again, we monitor those daily, and they really, from an ecological perspective, they're doing some good work up there, and they're really backing down on us. They're making runs to the north on the Canadians, but the south end of the fires are pretty much kind of backing down for the most part. And that's because we just don't get that many strong north winds this time of year.
And Connie, throughout the season, then the Canadian wildfire fighters were in the north, and what we're seeing on the screen here, did that burn uncontrolled? Then there were no suppression efforts. Is that correct?
Well, there were some. When they could free up some resources, they would come down either with their aviation assets and drop water, or they actually at times did insert some crews to try to put some line containment in, especially in the areas that were really threatening the US. But you know, they just, the conditions were such that they weren't overly successful at that. But I think the saving grace again for us is that they were mostly backing towards us. They have not crossed over at this point.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Connie. And We had talked about some of the challenges in fighting these fires, and you know, Connie and Clark as well. Please talk about the practical logistical challenges that you've been fighting all season here.
Well, yeah, so I guess it depends on the fire. First of all, just having the resources to respond to all the initial starts has been difficult. And as you know, the state as a whole for most of the season was running dry. So there are fires all over the state. So we have a very strong interagency partnership with our state DNR and our other federal partners. And so a lot of those aviation assets that weren't committed to our fires were sort of pooled, so to speak, and they were run through a priority process every day about where they were sent. And then I would say the difficulty in these wilderness fires are if it's not, you know, if it's initial start and if it's an initial start, and if there's not a good water body nearby where we can bring firefighters in through the use of our beavers or through paddling or whatever effort we have, if they're in those areas that are just hard to get to, you know, then we have to ask the question is, if we don't have a way to get our firefighters in and out safely, or if they're in there running chainsaws and they get a chainsaw cut, we have to have some sort of support to them in order to get them out. So a lot of times, you know, we just couldn't go in right away until we figured out some helippods, or simply the number of resources were already taken, that all of the aviation might have been on other fires in the state, and we just didn't have anything to put on them. So those are just really difficult fires to suppress. And then of course, you know, the whole drought that we're in and the fuel and fire conditions have made even outside the wilderness and even with equipment and other things just difficult to put out.
So Chris, I'm gonna follow up. I'm gonna initiate a public information officer task book for Connie, because I don't know that anyone could give you a better answer than that. And she's absolutely right. One of the first things that happens is our operational staff takes a hard look at the access. Does it make sense to put people in there? And then we began to, if we decide to put people in a place like that, we've already thought about what are the contingencies and how are we going to respond. And I've been on a couple of instances where in fact we had people in the wilderness, we had an accident, had an issue, and it became a very real issue that we had to deal with. And unfortunately, in my case on other teams, we had planned for that. And so that, yeah, firefighter and public safety first and foremostly. We've had the opportunity here though on the Greenwood to use some unique implements, the Marshmaster that you see in that picture. This one in particular, I think came off the Saney National Wildlife Refuge in Michigan, and I know those fellows and work with them. But providing access and thinking about access, thinking about how we get into a place, how we get out of a place, those are some of the issues that we think about well before we start to implement any sort of suppression tactic. I want to back up and talk a little bit about one of the questions that popped up in the chat, and that was impacts to wildlife. And on my day job, I'm actually a wildlife biologist as well as a contaminants person. Our map of the Greenwood is a little bit misleading. So you see this large area that is painted pink. But if you were to actually look at that map using aerial photography, what you would see are substantial areas of green. So this fire has skunked along the surface, jumped into the crown, gone around areas, say like, in fact, in Division Charlie there, the fire is hung up right now in areas of hardwoods, so poplar, aspen. And so the fire has not swept through this area uniformly. There is a lot of variability and a lot of areas that we would consider to be refuges. And so areas still that are intact that can provide wildlife habitat. So it's not as if we've had a uniform severe fire that has swept across the landscape. So we expect, you know, species like rodents or the less mobile animals, raccoons, possums, skunks, our friends, the porcupines. In areas where those animals are, there's going to be some mortality. Animals that are much more mobile, moose, deer, any of our avian species, probably very little impact. The other thing to think about is this whole process of ecological succession, and fire being an instrumental part of this landscape in terms of maintaining certain habitat types. So early successional forest, we're going to see in the near term some benefit to species like grouse and moose that depend on that new growth vegetation. So even though there are going to be some impacts to some species, in the near term, we'll begin to see some benefit to other species. So I hope that answers that question.
And Chris, if I could just to follow up too on the earlier question about the difficulties of or the challenges of fighting fire, especially in the wilderness, I do want to point out, because I think this is important for many visitors to understand, is that it takes our wilderness rangers, our public safety group, 2 to 3 days sometimes to, if we have a fire start and we need to move people out of the way. It's not like a outside of wilderness where people get in their car and drive away because they're being evacuated. It really is about a lot of forward prep time, thinking ahead and starting to move people in an orderly fashion. And so it's no easy task when we do try to move all, if you're in there. And so making a decision to allow people back in, then we also have to accept the consequence of that would be if we did have to move people out again, that that is quite a task. And I just wanted to point that out as another challenge of fighting fire in the wilderness, because when and sometimes we'll get in there and we need to do what we call a firing operation, which is to protect a boundary or bring a fire to a natural feature like a lake. And we can't do that if we have people in there. So I just think that's something that y'all need to think about too, as part of a difficulty.
Thanks, Connie. There's a lot of contingency planning that out there on things. And on Friday, we had a little discussion about some of what it goes into the Firewise and trying to protect areas from burning up here. And maybe why don't we start with perhaps Claire? You could talk about what you've done at Sawbill Canoe Outfitters to kind of guard against the negative impacts of fire on where you're at.
Yeah, sure. So living up here, I mean, the reality of wildfires is something that we contemplate all the time, right? So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and we try to live by that principle. So we have a really robust sprinkler system at Sawbill that is set up kind of around the perimeter of the property up here and also on all of the buildings. That sprinkler system we test at least twice a year, in the spring and the fall, and then periodically throughout the season, depending on the fire danger. So right now it's ready. We just flip a switch and it can, the pump can turn on. We pump water out of the nearby lake, and we can sprinkler our whole system up here. All of our buildings have been replaced with most all our buildings have metal roofs now. So we've replaced everything with a metal roof, which we keep free as we can of pine needles, which is a constant battle. So it's the kind of thing that, Firewise really takes constant management. It's not the kind of thing where you can like install a system or, do it one time and you're good to go. It's something that you sort of have to do constant upkeep on. So that's something that's always in the back of our minds. We do a lot of brushing around the property, again, around the perimeter, brushing away from buildings, raking things away from the sides of buildings, limbing trees up to a certain height, trying to, get rid of some of those like ladder fuels that might be in the woods right around our buildings. Anybody who's been up here knows that it's a really lush environment. Even in a drought, it's pretty lush. And so it's kind of a constant battle to like fight back the forest a little bit and keep that sort of defensible zone around our spaces up here. So it's a constant. We do it, we put a big effort into it twice a year in the spring and in the fall, but then again throughout the season as needed. So there's some great resources out there that we've certainly utilized. We look to the Firewise community, and there's a lot of information online about best practices and things that you should focus on. And so we've utilized those over the years and try to train our staff in some of that and keep an eye on it. It's just a constant thing that we do.
Maybe you want to share with the audience here what you have on your blackboard with respect to balsam there.
Yeah, so we have a chalkboard in our office where we leave notes to each other. And I was telling the other panelists here before we started today that right now our chalkboard says balsam equals bad on the board because there's just a bunch of balsam fir around up here. It's like real thick. It's everywhere in the forest. And so the Forest Service has done a lot of work in sort of the Sawbill adjacent areas up here over the last several years to clear out a lot of that balsam. It's prone to having that budworm invasive pests to get into it. So they've done a lot of clearing to help prevent that, creates better moose habitat. It's good for a lot of reasons to sort of clear some of that balsam out. So there's been a lot of work in our area here that we've seen done over the years from the Forest Service. It's really benefited the forest. We see more wildlife in there. It's regenerating really well. So there's always more balsam to be cut. So we'll keep working on that.
And Claire, would you expand a little bit on the sort of importance of a public-private partnership and some of the funding programs that are out there for landowners and how it's helpful to protect structures and keep fires away from structures?
Yeah, I think it comes down to this concept. There's a little bit of personal responsibility. And that's sort of a theme that's been run throughout these conversations, in terms of even Boundary Waters trips, going into the wilderness, choosing to live or recreate in these woods. There's always going to be, like Connie mentioned before, a certain level of risk associated with that, but there's also a certain amount of personal accountability that has to be associated with that too. So part of, going out into the wilderness or owning property up here or managing property up here is being aware of these risks and mitigating them to the best that you can, right? There are things that we can do proactively that will help conserve firefighting resources should a fire, when a fire sweeps through our area. If we've got a really defensible space up here, that makes the firefighters' lives easier when they come up to protect our structures. So yeah, it's definitely the kind of thing, I know there are meetings held all the time about firewising in different communities. Oftentimes people don't show up to those meetings unless there's a fire happening or immediately after a big fire, like right after the Ham Lake fire. That was a big push to firewise a lot of things up here in Cook County. So participating in those on a regular basis is helpful. And down the line, makes it easier and less of a resource strain if we're more prepared as things start to come through. Certainly up here, we're in a unique position because we're on national forest land. Sawbill doesn't own the property up here. We are on a special use permit. So we work really closely with the Forest Service to work on the property up here. And I've seen a lot of great efforts and partnerships come out of that.
Great, thanks so much, Claire. Connie, do you want to add anything regarding the Firewise?
I think actually Claire did a very good job of describing it. Certainly our agency, the Forest Service, is very much behind those efforts, working with communities to help develop plans. And then we put a lot of emphasis on doing the wildland urban interface, where we focus our fuel management and our treatments of reducing fuels around those communities and homes. And so I think it's a really good combined partnership. And but again, I think we've seen over and over again when we see fires burn through a community or a subdivision, those structures, those areas where Firewise has been implemented certainly stand out because they're the ones that make it through. So I can't say enough for if you haven't looked into Firewise, there's lots of information, lots of help. Please do so, and don't wait till the fire's moving through the backyard to do that.
Great, thank you, Connie there. And we've talked a little bit granular on these particular fires that are facing us right now, kind of moving to a bigger picture of some of the macro causes of this and looking at climate change. Expanding on your thoughts that you began, Claire, last Friday. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about, the Band-Aid versus, structural issues that we really need to think about here.
Yeah, so I sort of see this issue in two respects. There's sort of the short-term issue and the long-term issue. So the short-term issue is, obviously there's a drought right now, there's a closure right now, there's all these issues happening in this moment that are affecting, our businesses and our communities. And what can we do to support each other and make it through this fire season? It's easy to focus on those things, but in, very shortly here, it'll be winter, and that'll put a quick pause on this fire season. But next spring, we're going to be probably, unless we get a whole lot of snow, kind of right back where we started with another drought and another fire season. So this is, the reality of climate change is that this is going to continue to be an issue and going to continue to affect our communities and our businesses going forward. So it's something to think about. It's something to pay attention to. You can use your vote and your voice to contact, representatives and senators. I know it's something that both at the state and federal level, our representatives are certainly aware of, but it's helpful to have, people reach out and make sure that that's on the forefront of their mind, that, climate change and building resiliency in our communities and our businesses can only be a positive thing going forward. So I'd encourage people to reach out and just, make sure that your elected representatives are aware of this issue and how it's affecting our communities here. So often Northern Minnesota is the last one to be affected by things, right? We're kind of the last ones to get like the latest fashion trends. Up in Cook County, we're the last ones to get COVID cases, but we will not be the last ones to feel the effects of climate change. That's just not how that works. We're going to be facing that issue at the same time as everyone else.
Thank you so much, Claire, for those comments there, and thank you for putting in the link in the chat. Maybe you want to expand a little bit about some of that research there.
Yeah, I think we've kind of run out of time for that, but maybe next time. A lot of those publications are done in conjunction with universities and the Nature Conservancy and other partners of ours. So. And that website that I put has all kinds of publications, and that's just the Northern Research Station and not all of our research stations. I'll put other links for that in as well.
Good deal. And we have on our screen here some additional links for more resources on this here, so that NC Web site there can provide sort of some of the most up-to-date information that is out there. So, we have a lot of folks that are sort of have real world issues of, boy, I was planning to go out September 6th or so. What should we tell them, Connie, right now? So if people are that they should please stay tuned for information. What for those practical on the ground questions for people that have reservations after September 3rd?
I know this maybe isn't the answer you want right now. I would say stay tuned. It really is a matter of us sitting down, which we are currently doing with our fire experts, and looking at risk and evaluating the risk of safety, and then also knowing how much people want to be in there at least sometime this season, and how much of an impact the closure is having on our partners and businesses. So until I see that kind of final presentation, but it will be very shortly, we'll make a decision. So I would say, just start staying tuned and you'll see something, I think, in the next a day or so. And that's the best I can answer right now. I don't want to make any promises without seeing the data in front of me. I also just want to say very much a big thank you to our cooperators, the businesses, our local loggers. We were able to contract with many of them, and they provided goods and services in support of the fire, whether that be through some outfitting of some of those crews going in, or food, simple things like toilets, and the loggers that have been able to do the fuel breaks in the Greenwood fire. Just an overwhelming ability to contract with local businesses has just made a big difference in our ability to contain these fires. So thank you.
And to follow up what Connie is saying, we're talking with our operations section chief and talking about what those local guys were able to accomplish in terms of our fuel breaks. They started at something like a mile of fuel break per day. And yesterday they reported they had done like 3 miles in a single day. And it was just beyond belief in terms of the production and efficiency that they were operating on the landscape. They've really done an exceptional job. And so 2 thumbs way up to those local contractors that have assisted us on the fire line.
Great. Well, thanks to all those, the cooperators and local businesses and loggers that are helping this effort. And thank you to our all of you on this panel, Claire, Clark, and Connie, Johanna behind the scenes there. Thanks so much for that. I know it's been long days for all of you these recent weeks and actually throughout these months here this summer. So thank you for all the work that you're doing here. For supporters of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, we are very excited that we will have our annual gathering virtually this October 16th. That is a Saturday. And please go to our website there that you see there, friends-bwca.org/annual gathering to get information on that. Your support makes our work possible. And we know that you as individuals are the strength of our organization, and your passion for the Boundary Waters is what makes our work possible, and what inspires us as well. So again, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all of us for joining us this first day of September. Have a great afternoon, and we'll stay tuned here on what's next. So again, thank you everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.